My name is Daniel Harper, and I'm 53 years old. For almost 16 years, I worked as a maintenance supervisor at one of the largest food processing plants in Ohio. It wasn't glamorous work, and nobody ever wrote articles about people like me. We weren't executives. We weren't engineers with fancy degrees. We were the people who made sure thousands of machines kept running every single day so production never stopped. If a conveyor belt failed at 2 in the morning, my phone rang. If refrigeration units malfunctioned during a holiday weekend, I was expected to fix them. If an entire production line shut down because someone overlooked a tiny mechanical issue, I was usually the person who figured out what had gone wrong. I never complained. That was simply the job. When I started back in 2008, the maintenance department was a mess. Equipment failures happened almost every week. Emergency repairs cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. Contractors charged ridiculous prices because nobody inside the company understood the machines well enough to repair them. I spent years changing that. I learned every production line, every hydraulic system, every electrical panel, every refrigeration compressor. I knew which machines needed preventive maintenance before they showed any symptoms. I knew which replacement parts always arrived late from suppliers. I knew which temporary fixes actually worked and which ones only delayed a bigger problem. Eventually, breakdowns became rare. Management loved showing visitors around the factory because everything looked organized. The machines almost never stopped. Production targets were consistently met. People assumed everything simply worked. What they didn't see were the years of experience behind those results. The midnight emergency calls. The weekends spent crawling under machinery. The holidays interrupted because something critical had failed. None of that appeared on monthly performance reports. Success became invisible because problems stopped happening. For years, I reported to Michael Sanders. He wasn't perfect, but he understood something important. Experience mattered. Whenever corporate suggested cutting maintenance budgets, Michael defended our department. You don't notice maintenance when it's done right, he'd tell executives. You only notice it when everything starts breaking. He retired after 34 years. Everyone expected the company to promote someone with manufacturing experience. Instead, corporate hired a new operations manager from outside the company. His name was Ethan Collins. He was 32. He had an MBA. He had worked in consulting. He had never spent a single day repairing industrial equipment. During his first staff meeting, he talked for nearly an hour. Operational efficiency, digital transformation, cost optimization, lean workforce. Every sentence sounded like it came from a business textbook. He rarely asked questions. Instead, he explained how companies became more competitive by reducing labor costs and relying on technology instead of legacy processes. I remember looking around the conference room. Nobody argued. Everyone simply nodded. People with mortgages don't challenge new management during their first meeting. First, Ethan barely spoke to me. He spent weeks reviewing spreadsheets instead of walking through the factory. He loved dashboards, charts, PowerPoint presentations, color-coded performance metrics. Whenever we met, he'd ask questions that sounded reasonable but revealed how little he understood the operation. Why do we need 6 maintenance technicians during the night shift? What exactly are they doing if equipment isn't breaking? Couldn't predictive software replace some of this experience? I answered patiently every time. The reason equipment isn't breaking is because they're preventing failures before they happen. He'd smile politely. I understand. But it became obvious that he didn't. A few months later, he hired a consulting company to review our department. The consultants spent 3 days inside the plant. 3 days. Some of my technicians had worked there for over 20 years. One consultant followed me around with a tablet timing how long routine inspections took. Another photographed equipment. They asked basic questions. Why do you check this motor every Tuesday? Why do you replace this bearing every 6 months instead of waiting until it fails? I explained every procedure. Not because I trusted them. Because hiding information would only hurt the people who worked beside me. 2 weeks after they left, Ethan called another meeting. The consultants had produced a 40-page report. According to them, our maintenance department was overstaffed. Too much preventive maintenance. Too many experienced employees. Too many labor hours devoted to inspections. The report recommended reducing costs by hiring younger technicians with broader software skills, while relying more heavily on automated monitoring systems. Some managers applauded. Lower costs looked impressive on quarterly reports. I looked around the room again. Most of the people celebrating had never repaired a broken production line. They only saw numbers, not consequences. Over the next 6 months, small changes began appearing. Older technicians were encouraged to retire early. Open positions weren't filled. Training budgets disappeared. Whenever someone with 20 years of experience left, they were replaced by someone fresh out of technical school earning nearly half the salary. The younger employees weren't lazy. Most of them genuinely wanted to learn. The problem wasn't their attitude. The problem was that management expected 6 months of classroom education to replace decades of practical experience. They couldn't. Several experienced mechanics quietly warned Ethan, "We're losing too much knowledge." He always gave the same answer. Modern businesses have to evolve. By then I had started noticing something else. Every promotion, every new hire, every leadership meeting, the average age kept getting younger. One afternoon, I overheard Ethan speaking with someone from Human Resources outside the conference room. He didn't know I was walking down the hallway. "We need fresh energy," he said. "This department has been doing things the same way for years." The HR manager laughed. "I know exactly what you mean." Neither of them noticed me. I kept walking. For the first time in 16 years, I had the uncomfortable feeling that experience was no longer considered an asset. It had quietly become a liability. About 8 months after Ethan arrived, I was called into a meeting with Human Resources. I assumed it was about next year's maintenance budget. Instead, there were 3 people waiting inside the conference room: Ethan, Melissa from HR, and someone I'd never met before. He introduced himself as a representative from corporate operations. That immediately made me nervous. Corporate never attended routine department meetings. Ethan folded his hands on the table. "Daniel, thank you for coming." His voice sounded rehearsed. "We've completed a comprehensive operational review." I stayed quiet. "The company is restructuring several departments to improve efficiency." There it was. That word. Restructuring. It almost never meant anything good. Melissa slid a folder across the table. "We've decided to eliminate your current position." I stared at her. "I'm sorry." Ethan leaned forward. "This isn't about your performance. It's about aligning the department with our future operational strategy." I looked at him for several seconds. "So, who will supervise maintenance?" "We're creating a new maintenance operations coordinator position." That sounds exactly like my job. It has different responsibilities. "What responsibilities?" He hesitated. "The role will focus more heavily on digital asset management." I couldn't help smiling. Not because anything was funny, because the explanation made no sense. "You mean someone will still manage the department?" "Yes." "They'll still schedule maintenance?" "Yes." "They'll still oversee technicians?" "Yes." "They'll still report equipment failures?" "Correct." "So you're replacing me?" "No. We're eliminating your position." It was amazing how many words companies invented to avoid saying something simple. Melissa pushed another document toward me. "You'll receive 8 weeks of severance if you sign these papers today." I didn't touch them. "I'd like to understand why this is happening." Ethan answered immediately. "The company is moving in a different direction." "What direction?" "A younger." He stopped himself, for just a fraction of a second, then corrected the sentence. "A more technology-focused direction." That pause stayed with me. He almost said it. Almost. Instead, he replaced one word with another. But I had heard enough. "I've worked here 16 years. We appreciate your service. I've trained almost everyone in this department. And we're grateful. We've had record production for 6 straight years." "Yes. So why exactly am I no longer needed?" The corporate operations representative finally spoke. "Business needs evolve." That was it. No performance issue. No misconduct. No financial losses. No complaints. Just vague corporate language that could mean absolutely anything. I stood up. I'm not signing anything today. Melissa nodded. That's your right. I'd like copies of everything. Of course. As I walked toward the door, Ethan spoke again. We'll need your assistance with the transition. I turned around. What transition? We'd like you to spend the next 2 weeks documenting your procedures. So the person replacing me knows what to do. Again, replacing me, even if nobody wanted to admit it. I left without saying another word. Back in the maintenance office, I closed the door and sat quietly for nearly 20 minutes. My toolbox stood against the wall. Family photos covered one corner of my desk. A coffee mug my daughter had given me years earlier sat beside my computer. Everything looked exactly the same, except none of it belonged to me anymore. One by one, my technicians started coming into the office. Word spreads fast in factories, especially bad news. Jerry spoke first. They're really letting you go? I nodded. They're calling it restructuring. Nobody laughed. Nobody believed it. Mike shook his head. This place won't run without you. It'll run. For a while. Nobody said anything after that. The silence was worse than sympathy. These were men I'd worked beside for years. We had spent Christmas mornings fixing broken freezers together. Worked overnight during blizzards. Missed birthdays. Missed anniversaries. Shared coffee at 3 in the morning while waiting for replacement motors to arrive. Now they were watching someone disappear. And they all understood one thing. If it could happen to me, could happen to any of them. Around lunchtime, I started organizing my files. Maintenance schedules. Equipment histories. Vendor contacts. Preventive inspection records. Most of it existed electronically. But the important information wasn't inside the software. It was inside people's heads. The software never told you that one compressor always overheated during unusually humid weeks. It never warned you that a certain supplier consistently shipped defective bearings every third delivery. It never explained why one production line vibrated differently after replacing a specific motor. Those were things you learned after years inside the plant. Experience couldn't be downloaded into a spreadsheet. Late that afternoon, Ethan stopped by my office. How's the documentation going? I've started. Great. We really need everything detailed. I'll write what I can. He smiled. I appreciate your professionalism. I looked directly at him. Can I ask you one honest question? Sure. If I were 33 instead of 53, would I still be sitting in this office? His smile disappeared. This decision has nothing to do with age. I didn't say it did. He looked uncomfortable. I just asked a question. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Finally he said, I think you're reading too much into this. Maybe, maybe not. But people usually become uncomfortable only when a question gets close to the truth. The following Monday, I returned to begin the transition. A young man was sitting in the office across the hallway. He couldn't have been older than 27. He stood up and smiled. You must be Daniel. I've heard a lot about you. I shook his hand. I'm Kevin, the new maintenance operations coordinator. The title was different. The job wasn't. And in that moment, every explanation I'd been given during the previous week fell apart without another word being spoken. Kevin looked nervous. He had probably been told this would be an exciting promotion. Instead, he had walked into an office where the person he was replacing was still cleaning out his desk. I know this is awkward, he said quietly. It isn't your fault. And I meant it. He wasn't the one who decided I had become too expensive. He wasn't the one who sat in meetings discussing labor costs, while pretending experience had no value. He was simply someone who had accepted a job offer, the same way I would have at his age. For the next several days, I showed him how the department actually worked. Not because management deserved my help, because the technicians deserved someone who at least had a chance to succeed. Kevin asked questions constantly. He wrote everything down. Unlike Ethan, he actually listened. So this inspection isn't in the software, he said while looking at one of the refrigeration units. No. Then how did you know to check it every Thursday? Because every summer the compressor starts running hotter after 3 consecutive humid days. He stared at me. How do you remember things like that? You don't memorize them. You live through enough failures that you stop forgetting. He nodded. I could see him beginning to understand that maintenance wasn't just following checklists. It was recognizing patterns, knowing what wasn't written anywhere. By Friday afternoon, I had finished everything the company had asked for. Maintenance schedules, equipment records, vendor lists, passwords, emergency procedures. Every document I could reasonably create. But I also knew something. No document could replace 16 years of experience. Before leaving, I handed Ethan a thick binder. Everything you requested is in there. He looked pleased. I appreciate your cooperation. I simply nodded. Then I picked up the cardboard box holding my personal belongings. 1 coffee mug, 3 framed family photos, a small radio I listened to during overnight repairs, 2 company service awards. 16 years reduced to 1 cardboard box. As I walked across the factory floor, people stopped working long enough to shake my hand. Some wished me luck. Others just nodded. Factories aren't emotional places. People usually keep moving because production never stops. Neither does business. I reached the parking lot without looking back. The first few weeks after losing my job felt strangely empty. For 16 years, my phone had started ringing before sunrise. Suddenly there were no calls, no emergency repairs, no meetings, no schedules, just silence. My wife Laura tried to stay positive. We'll get through this. I know. We've been through worse. Maybe. But unemployment at 53 feels different than unemployment at 30. Companies say they value experience. Job postings say the same thing. Reality often looks very different. I updated my resume. Applied everywhere. Manufacturing plants, distribution centers, food processing companies, packaging facilities. Almost every interview followed the same pattern. The hiring manager smiled while reading my resume. Impressive background. You've managed large maintenance teams. Excellent stability. You clearly know your field. Then came the question, where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? I answered honestly, I'd like to keep working until retirement. Sometimes I noticed expressions change. Subtle. Almost invisible. Like they had just realized I wasn't a young candidate they could keep for 20 years. Other interviews ended differently. We've decided to move in another direction. We found someone whose background better fits our future needs. We're looking for a different long-term profile. Different words. The same outcome. About a month after leaving the company, I met Jerry for coffee. He still worked at the plant. He looked exhausted. How's everything going? He laughed. Not great. What happened? They thought Kevin could replace 16 years overnight. I figured. It's not really Kevin's fault. I didn't think it was. He's trying. But Ethan expects him to know everything immediately. Jerry stirred his coffee. They've already had 3 unexpected shutdowns. I wasn't surprised. Machines don't care about management presentations. They only respond to proper maintenance. Jerry continued. The technicians keep asking Kevin questions. Can he answer them? Sometimes. And the rest? He calls outside contractors. I knew exactly what that meant. The company was now paying thousands of dollars for repairs we had always handled internally. Not because Kevin lacked intelligence. Because experience takes years to build. It cannot be accelerated. Jerry hesitated before speaking again. There's something else. What? I probably shouldn't tell you. If you don't want to, don't. He leaned closer. I overheard Ethan talking to HR. I stayed quiet. He said replacing senior employees was saving the company nearly $400,000 a year. Just salary? No. He specifically mentioned lowering the average age of management. I looked at him. Are you sure? I'm positive. He said younger managers adapt faster. That sentence stayed with me the entire drive home. Lowering the average age. Not improving performance. Not increasing productivity. Lowering the average age. That evening, Laura noticed I wasn't paying attention during dinner. What happened? I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. Finally she asked, do you think your age had something to do with your termination? I don't know. But I'm starting to think it wasn't just a coincidence. The next morning I opened my laptop. For the first time since losing my job, I wasn't searching for employment. I was searching for something else. I wanted to know exactly what the law said about age discrimination. The more I read, the more familiar the situation began to sound. And for the first time since being fired, I stopped asking myself whether what happened was fair. Instead, I started asking a different question. Could I prove it? I spent the next 2 weeks gathering everything I could. Emails, performance reviews, company announcements, old training records. Anything that could explain why someone with 16 years of excellent evaluations had suddenly become unnecessary. At first I didn't find much. Corporate managers rarely put discriminatory decisions in writing. They know better. Everything is wrapped in vague phrases. Business needs. Strategic restructuring. Organizational efficiency. Words that sound reasonable until you start comparing them to what actually happened. Then I began speaking with former coworkers. Not asking them to take sides. Just asking what had changed after I left. Jerry wasn't the only one who had noticed a pattern. 2 supervisors over 50 had accepted early retirement packages within the same year. Another maintenance planner who was 56 had been told his position was also being restructured. His replacement was 29. An inventory coordinator with nearly 20 years of service had quietly disappeared from the organizational chart. A few weeks later, someone almost half her age was doing the exact same work under a different job title. One story by itself meant very little. Together they painted a different picture. One evening Kevin called me. I almost didn't answer. He sounded embarrassed. I hope I'm not bothering you. No. What's going on? He sighed. I wanted to thank you. For what? For leaving such detailed notes. They've saved me more than once. I'm glad. There was a long silence. Then he spoke again. I don't think they told me everything before I accepted this job. What do you mean? They described it like I would mostly be managing software. And I'm barely using the software. I'm fixing emergencies every day. Contractors are constantly here. The technicians know more than I do. They're frustrated. I don't blame them. Neither did I. Kevin wasn't my enemy. He had walked into a situation that management completely misunderstood. I've been trying to learn, he continued. I really have. I know. But they expected me to replace 16 years of experience in a few weeks. Another silence. Finally he asked, Can I ask you something? Sure. Did they let you go because of money? I think money was part of it. And your age. I think that mattered too. I've wondered about that. Why? Because during orientation Ethan told me the company needed younger leadership that could grow with the business. I stopped writing. What exactly did he say? Kevin hesitated. I don't remember every word. But I clearly remember him saying they wanted people who would be with the company for the next 20 or 30 years. At the time it sounded normal. Now it feels different. I thanked him for calling. When we hung up, I sat quietly in my office. That conversation didn't prove anything by itself, but it fit the same pattern I'd been seeing for weeks. I decided it was time to speak with someone who understood employment law. The attorney's office was smaller than I expected. No marble floors. No expensive furniture. Just shelves filled with legal books and stacks of case files. Her name was Rebecca Lawson. She listened for nearly an hour without interrupting. Only taking notes. When I finished, she folded her hands. I need to ask you a difficult question. Go ahead. Do you want your job back? I thought about it. Not for long. No. Why not? Because I don't trust the people who fired me. She nodded. That's an important answer. What I want, I continued, is accountability. I gave that company 16 years. I trained people. I solved problems. I never received a bad performance review. And then one day I became expendable. Rebecca reviewed my documents one by one. Performance evaluations, letters of recognition, production awards, salary history, organizational charts. Finally she looked up. I can't promise we'll win. I understand. But I do believe there's enough here to investigate whether your termination was motivated by age. What happens next? We file a complaint. We request company records. We take depositions. And we see what the evidence shows. It won't be quick. I know. It could take years. I know. She closed the file. Are you ready for that? I looked out the office window for a moment. Losing my job had already changed my life. My career. My confidence. My family's financial security. The lawsuit wouldn't erase any of that. It wouldn't magically give me those 16 years back. But remaining silent would mean accepting that everything had been normal. It wasn't. A week later, Rebecca officially filed the case. The company denied every allegation. Their lawyers insisted the termination had been based entirely on restructuring and operational efficiency. Exactly what I expected. There was no dramatic apology, no executive admitting fault, no emotional phone call asking me to return. Business continued exactly as it always does. Production lines kept moving. Meetings continued. Quarterly reports were published. Someone else sat in my old office. Someone else parked in my old space. The world moved on. So did I. I eventually found another job. It paid less. The responsibilities were different. It wasn't the career I had imagined finishing, but it allowed me to keep providing for my family while the legal process slowly unfolded. People often say that loyalty matters, that hard work is always rewarded, that if you dedicate yourself to one company, they'll take care of you in return. I believed that for most of my working life. Now I know better. Because after all those years of hard work, my employer simply replaced me with a younger worker without a second thought.